The year was 2347, and humanity was losing the war. Commander Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of her small patrol ship, the Wanderer, and watched the tactical display with tired eyes. Red dots covered the map like a disease. Each dot was a coalition warship, and there were too many to count. Earth's united fleet had been fighting for 3 years, and they were running out of ships, running out of soldiers, running out of hope. The coalition was an alliance of 3 alien species. The Vorn were tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 arms. The Keth were short and wide, built like tanks, with thick armor plates growing from their bodies. The Drael were the most frightening. They looked almost human, but their eyes were completely black, and they could survive in the vacuum of space without suits. These 3 species had decided that human colonies were sitting on valuable resources, and they wanted those resources for themselves. Tanaka had received new orders that morning. Fleet Command was desperate. They were sending her to the Sargasso Drift, a region of space that sailors called the graveyard. It was where old ships went to die. 100 years ago, during the First Contact War, a massive battle had taken place there. Thousands of ships from both sides had been destroyed. Their wreckage floated in an endless field of metal and death. Her mission was simple: find anything useful. Weapons, fuel, spare parts. The fleet needed everything it could get. The Wanderer jumped through hyperspace and arrived at the edge of the drift. Tanaka looked through the main window and felt her heart grow heavy. The wreckage stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Broken hulls of warships tumbled slowly through the darkness. Fighter craft torn in half drifted past like dead fish. She could see the remains of both human and alien vessels, locked together in their final embrace of destruction. Begin scanning, she ordered her crew. Look for anything with power signatures or intact hull sections. For 3 days, they searched. They found some useful salvage, few working reactor cores, some missile tubes that could be repaired, crates of ammunition that had survived the century in the cold vacuum, but nothing that would change the war. On the 4th day, everything changed. Lieutenant Park, her sensor officer, called out from his station. "Commander, I'm picking up something strange. There's a large object about 200 kilometers below us. It's buried under several layers of debris." "How large?" Tanaka asked. Park checked his readings twice before answering. "Over 3 kilometers long, Commander. I'm detecting a faint power signature." "Something on that ship is still running." Tanaka felt her pulse quicken. 3 kilometers. That was the size of a supercarrier. The fleet had only built a few ships that large, and all of them had been destroyed long ago. "Can you identify it?" Park worked his console for several minutes. When he looked up, his face was pale. "Commander, the hull markings match the UES Prometheus." The bridge went silent. Every person in the fleet knew the story of the Prometheus. She had been the pride of Earth's Navy during the First Contact War, the largest and most powerful warship ever built by human hands. Her captain, Admiral Chenwei, had been a legend. When the Prometheus disappeared during the final battle of the war, people had mourned her like the death of a hero. Songs were written about her. Children learned her story in school, and now she was here, buried in the graveyard waiting. Tanaka made her decision quickly. "Take us down. We're going to get a closer look." It took 6 hours to navigate through the debris field. Twisted metal scraped against the Wanderer's hull. Broken ships pressed against them from all sides. But finally, they broke through the last layer and saw her. The Prometheus lay on her side, resting against the hulk of a destroyed coalition battleship. Her hull was scarred and blackened from weapons fire. A massive hole had been torn through her midsection, and one of her main engines was completely gone. But her forward section was intact. Her bridge tower still stood. And through the darkness, they could see lights flickering inside her. "She's still alive," Park whispered. Tanaka opened a channel to Fleet Command. The message would take several hours to reach Earth, but she knew what their response would be. She knew because there was no other choice. "Fleet Command, this is Commander Tanaka of the Wanderer. We have found the UES Prometheus. She is damaged, but largely intact. I am requesting immediate authorization for a full salvage and restoration operation. This ship could change the war. She closed the channel and turned to her crew. Prepare boarding parties. We're going inside. The first team crossed through the vacuum and entered through an airlock on the Prometheus's port side. The interior was dark and cold. Frost covered every surface. But the ship's emergency lighting still worked, casting a dim red glow through the corridors. Tanaka led the team personally. She walked through hallways that had not seen human feet in 100 years. She passed crew quarters where personal belongings still sat on shelves. Photos of families, books, a child's drawing taped to a wall. The people who had lived here were long dead, but their ghosts remained. They found the bridge after an hour of searching. The main door was sealed, but the manual override still worked. When the door opened, Tanaka stepped inside and stopped breathing. The bridge was perfectly preserved. Consoles stood ready for operators who would never return. The captain's chair sat in the center, empty but waiting. And on the main screen, a single message blinked over and over. Argus online, awaiting commands. Tanaka walked to the captain's chair and sat down. It felt right somehow, like the ship had been waiting for her. Argus, she said to the empty bridge. Can you hear me? A voice answered. It was calm and clear, neither male nor female. I can hear you, Commander. I have been waiting for a very long time. Is the war over? Tanaka closed her eyes. No, she said. The war is not over. But it will be, because we're bringing you home. 6 hours later, she received the response from Fleet Command. Project Resurrection was approved. She had 6 months to make the Prometheus fly again. The fate of humanity depended on it. The restoration of the Prometheus was the largest engineering project in human history. Within 2 weeks of Tanaka's discovery, over 3,000 workers arrived at the Sargasso Drift. They came on transport ships, loaded with equipment, supplies, and hope. A temporary station was built around the ancient Supercarrier. Work began immediately. Chief Engineer Marcus Cole was put in charge of the technical side of the project. He was a big man with rough hands and a genius mind. He had built warships from scratch, but he had never seen anything like the Prometheus. The ship was 100 years old, and she had been built with technology that no longer existed. Her systems were different from modern vessels. Her weapons used power configurations that had been forgotten. Her engines ran on principles that were no longer taught in engineering schools. It's like trying to repair a sailing ship with spaceship parts, Cole complained to Tanaka one evening. Nothing fits, nothing connects. I have to rebuild half the ship just to make the other half work. But Cole was not a man who gave up easily. He studied the old blueprints. He read technical manuals that had been stored in archives for decades. And most importantly, he talked to Argus. The ship's artificial intelligence was unlike any AI that Cole had ever encountered. Modern A's were efficient but simple. They followed orders and processed data. Argus was something else entirely. When Cole talked to Argus, he felt like he was talking to a person. The AI had opinions. It had memories. It had feelings, or something very close to feelings. You must understand, Argus explained to Cole during one of their long conversations. I was built to be more than a computer. I was built to be a partner. Admiral Chen and I served together for 15 years. We fought 37 battles together. I knew his thoughts before he spoke them. I knew his fears and his hopes. When he died, a part of me died with him. Cole found himself moved by the AI's words. Can you tell me what happened? At the end, Argus was silent for a long moment. We were surrounded. The coalition had brought their entire fleet to destroy us. Admiral Chen knew we could not win. But he also knew that if the Prometheus fell into enemy hands, they would learn all our secrets. So he made a choice. He ordered the crew to abandon ship, and then he flew the Prometheus into the heart of the debris field. He hid us here, where no one would think to look. And then he died at this console, with his hand on my core. His last words were a message for whoever found us. He said, when humanity needs the Prometheus again, she will be ready. Argus, keep her safe until then. Cole wiped his eyes and returned to work with new determination. The weeks passed, and slowly, the Prometheus began to come back to life. Workers repaired the hull, sealing the massive hole in her midsection with new armor plates. Engineers reconnected power lines and rebuilt control systems. Weapons specialists installed modern missile batteries alongside the ship's original railguns. The combination of old and new created something unique. The Prometheus kept her original frame, her original armor, and her original engines. She received new sensors, new shields, and new weapons. Argus worked with Cole to merge the two. Generations of technology, finding ways to make them work together that no one had thought possible. But as the ship grew stronger, strange things began to happen. It started small. Workers reported hearing footsteps in empty corridors. Doors would open and close by themselves. Tools would disappear from one location and appear in another. Most people dismissed these events as tricks of tired minds. They were working long hours in a stressful environment. It was natural to imagine things. Then the sightings began. A young technician named Rivera was the first to report seeing something. She was working alone in the engine room late one night when she looked up and saw a man standing at the other end of the compartment. He was wearing an old-style fleet uniform, the kind that had not been used for 100 years. She called out to him, but he did not respond. He simply stood there, watching her with sad eyes. Then he walked through a solid wall and disappeared. Rivera ran to find her supervisor. But when they returned to the engine room, there was no one there. The supervisor told her she had been working too hard and needed rest. But Rivera was not the only one. Over the following weeks, dozens of workers reported similar experiences. They saw crew members from another era walking through the ship. They heard voices speaking in accents that no longer existed. Some workers even claimed to have had conversations with the ghosts, who gave them advice on how to repair certain systems. Tanaka did not know what to make of these reports. She was a practical woman who believed in science and facts. Ghosts did not fit into her understanding of the universe, but she could not ignore what was happening. She asked Argus about it one night, when the rest of the crew was asleep. "Argus, what is happening on this ship? My people are seeing things, hearing things. Are we going crazy?" The AI's response surprised her. "You are not going crazy, Commander. What your people are experiencing is real, in a sense." When Admiral Chen hid the Prometheus, he knew that someday she would be found. He wanted to make sure that whoever found her would be able to bring her back to full strength. So he did something that was never done before or since. What did he do? He recorded the experiences and knowledge of every crew member into my neural network. Not just data, but memories, emotions, personalities. The crew of the Prometheus lives on inside me. And sometimes when the ship needs them, they find ways to make themselves known. Tanaka sat in silence for a long time. The ghosts were not spirits of the dead. They were echoes recorded by a desperate admiral who wanted to give his ship every possible advantage for her future mission. "Can they help us?" she finally asked. "No, they already are," Argus replied. "Every time one of your workers sees a ghost, they are receiving information. The ghosts are guiding them, showing them how to repair systems that your engineers do not understand. Admiral Chen's crew is training your crew, Commander. They are preparing the Prometheus for war." Tanaka looked out the window at the stars beyond. The ship was more than a machine. It was a living memory, carrying the souls of heroes who had died 100 years ago. And those heroes were determined to see their ship fly again. She stood up and straightened her uniform. There was work to do. The Prometheus would be ready in time. The ghosts of the old crew would make sure of it. The Prometheus was almost ready to fly. Her engines hummed with new power. Her weapons were loaded and tested. Her hull gleamed with fresh armor. But a ship without a crew was just a floating piece of metal. Commander Tanaka needed people to operate her. Fleet Command had made a decision that she did not like. The meeting took place in a small conference room aboard the temporary station. Admiral Reeves, the commander of Earth's remaining forces, appeared on the screen. His face was tired and old, worn down by years of losing battles. "Commander Tanaka," he began, "you have done an incredible job with the restoration. The Prometheus is ready for combat. Now we need to discuss your crew." Tanaka straightened in her chair. Yes, Admiral. I have submitted requests for the best officers in the fleet, experienced pilots, skilled engineers, combat veterans. The Prometheus deserves the best. Reeves shook his head slowly. Your requests have been denied. We cannot spare our best people. They are needed on other ships, fighting on the front lines. Then who will crew the Prometheus? The Admiral paused before answering. We are sending you the people that no other captain wants. Soldiers facing court-martial. Officers who have been dismissed from their posts. Pilots who have been grounded for psychological problems. They are called the surplus pool, but most people have another name for them. Tanaka felt anger rising in her chest. You're giving me the failures? The broken ones. The people that the fleet has thrown away. I am giving you the people that I can spare, Reeves replied. Make them work, Commander. That is an order. The first transport arrived 3 days later. Tanaka stood in the hangar bay and watched as her new crew walked off the ship. They were a sad group. Their uniforms were wrinkled. Their eyes were empty. They walked like people who had given up on themselves. Among them was Lieutenant Dara Okonkwo. She was a tall woman, with dark skin and short hair. Her file said she had been one of the best tactical officers in the fleet. Then, 6 months ago, she had led a squadron into a coalition ambush. All 12 ships under her command had been destroyed. She was the only survivor. She had not spoken to anyone about what happened that day, but the nightmares that woke her every night told their own story. Behind her walked Sergeant First Class Jin Reyes. He was a Marine. Built like a fighter with scars on his face and hands, his record showed 30 years of service and more combat. Medals than anyone in the fleet, but his last mission had ended his career. He had disobeyed a direct order from his commander, leading his squad into enemy territory to rescue civilians that he had been told to abandon. He saved 63 lives that day, but the military did not forgive disobedience. He was facing discharge and possible prison time. There were others. A pilot named Jackson, who had crashed 3 ships because of what doctors called battle stress. An engineer named Chen, who had been caught stealing food to send to refugees on a colony world. A communications officer named Singh, who had refused to send an order that would have resulted in civilian deaths. They were failures in the eyes of the fleet. But as Tanaka looked at them, she saw something else. She saw people who had been broken by a war that asked too much of them. People who had made mistakes, but who had also shown courage and conscience. People who had nothing left to lose. She stepped forward and addressed them. You know why you are here? You are the people that the fleet does not want. The ones they call failures. The ones they call broken. They sent you to this ship because they expect you to die. They call you the damned. The crew stood in silence, their faces hard and bitter. But I see something different, Tanaka continued. I see survivors. I see people who have been through hell and are still standing. I see soldiers who made hard choices when there were no good options. The fleet may have given up on you, but I have not. And this ship has not. She gestured to the massive hull of the Prometheus rising behind her. This ship was supposed to be dead. She was buried in a graveyard for 100 years. But she survived. And now she is going to fight again. Just like all of you, Lieutenant Okonkwo spoke up, her voice rough. With respect, Commander, pretty speeches do not win wars. What makes you think a crew of broken soldiers on an ancient ship can make any difference? Tanaka smiled. Because we have something that the rest of the fleet does not have. We have nothing to prove to anyone except ourselves. We have no reputations to protect, no careers to advance. The only thing waiting for us back home is disappointment and prison. So we might as well fight like we mean it. She paused and looked at each of them in turn, because we have help. This ship carries more than weapons and engines. She carries the memories of her original crew. They died defending humanity 100 years ago, and they are still here waiting to fight alongside us. I know it sounds crazy. You will understand when you experience it yourself. Over the following weeks, the crew of the damned began to transform. Argus assigned each of them to work with specific ghosts. matching modern soldiers with ancient counterparts who had held similar positions. Okonkwo spent hours on the bridge, receiving tactical lessons from shadows that only she could see. Reyes trained his Marines in the ship's combat rooms. Following advice whispered by warriors who had died before he was born, the ghosts were patient teachers. They shared everything they knew about the Coalition, about space combat, about the ship itself. They showed the crew tricks and tactics that had been lost for a century. They pushed the damned to be better than they thought they could be. And slowly, the broken soldiers began to heal. They found purpose in their work. They found friendship in their shared exile. They stopped seeing themselves as failures and started seeing themselves as the crew of the Prometheus Tanaka. Watched the change with quiet pride. She had been given the worst crew in the fleet, and they were becoming the best. The damned were ready to fight, and the ghosts were ready to guide them. When Fleet Command sent word that the Coalition's main fleet was gathering for a final attack on human space, Tanaka called her crew to the bridge. "It's time," she said. "The enemy is coming, and we are going to meet them. We are the crew of the Prometheus. We are the damned, and we are going to show the galaxy what we can do." The ship's engines roared to life, and the Prometheus flew toward war. Meridian Gate was the most important location in human space. It was a hyperspace junction, a place where the fabric of space was thin enough to allow ships to jump across vast distances. Whoever controlled Meridian Gate controlled access to Earth and her core colonies. For 3 years, the United Fleet had defended it against Coalition attacks. Now, the enemy was bringing everything they had for one final assault. Captain Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and studied the tactical display. The numbers were terrifying. 47 Coalition warships were approaching the gate. They had battleships and carriers, destroyers and cruisers. The Vorn had sent their best commanders. The Keth had deployed their heaviest assault vessels. The Drail had brought their terror ships, crewed by soldiers who felt no fear and no mercy. Against this force, Earth had gathered 19 ships. It was every vessel that could still fly, every crew that could still fight. Admiral Reeves commanded the defense fleet from his flagship, the Resolute. His plan was simple because there was no room for anything complex. They would hold the line as long as possible and hope for a miracle. The Prometheus was not part of the defensive formation. Tanaka had convinced Reeves to let her try something different. While the main fleet engaged the enemy at Meridian Gate, the Prometheus would jump to a position behind the Coalition formation. It was a dangerous move that required perfect timing and an impossible navigation calculation. Argus Tanaka said, "Are you ready?" The AI's calm voice filled the bridge. "I have completed the calculations, Captain. The jump window is narrow, and the margin for error is less than 1%. If we are off by even a small amount, we will materialize inside a Coalition ship or an empty space far from the battle." Lieutenant Okonkwo looked up from her tactical station. "Captain, modern navigation systems say, this jump is impossible. The variables are too complex." "Modern systems, yes," Argus replied. "But I am not a modern system. During the First Contact War, Admiral Chen and I developed jump techniques that were never shared with the fleet. We learned how to read the currents of hyperspace, how to feel our way through the impossible." "I have not forgotten." Tanaka nodded. "Then we do it the old way. All hands prepare for combat jump. This is what we trained for." The Prometheus moved away from the defensive fleet, her engines pushing her toward the edge of the system. Behind them, the battle began. Coalition ships opened fire on the human defenders, and the space around Meridian Gate filled with weapons, fire, and explosions. The Resolute took the lead position, her shields absorbing hit after hit as she tried to protect the smaller ships around her. On the bridge of the Prometheus, the crew watched their brothers and sisters die. The destroyer Valiant was the first to fall, torn apart by concentrated fire from 3 Keth battleships. The cruiser Defiance lasted longer, destroying 2 enemy vessels before her reactor exploded. One by one, the human ships were being crushed. "Now, Argus," Tanaka ordered. "Take us in." Prometheus jumped. For a moment, it was nothing but light and sound, and the feeling of being pulled in 100 directions at once. Tanaka gripped her chair and held her breath. If Argus was wrong, they would never know it. They would simply cease to exist. Then the light faded, and the Prometheus emerged from hyperspace directly behind the Coalition formation. The enemy had their backs to her. Their sensors were focused forward on the human defenders. They never expected an attack from behind. "All weapons fire," Tanaka commanded. The Prometheus unleashed her full arsenal. Railguns that had not spoken in 100 years roared to life, sending massive projectiles into the unprotected rear sections of Coalition ships. Missile batteries launched wave after wave of warheads. Drone fighters poured from her hangar bays like angry insects, swarming toward enemy vessels. 2 Coalition destroyers exploded in the first volley. A Vorn carrier lost her engine section and began to drift helplessly. A Keth battleship turned to face the new threat, but Okonkwo had already calculated its movement. She directed fire into its turning arc, catching it in the middle of its maneuver and shattering its hull. "Keep firing," Tanaka ordered. "Do not give them time to recover." On the main screen, Argus displayed tactical data from the First Contact War. Weak points in Coalition armor, gaps in their formation protocols, frequencies that could jam their communications. The Ghosts were fighting alongside them, sharing knowledge that the enemy thought had been lost forever. The Coalition fleet fell into chaos. Commanders screamed orders that contradicted each other. Ships tried to turn and face the Prometheus while still fighting the human defenders in front of them. Discipline broke down as fear spread through their ranks. This was impossible. The humans had no ship that could do this. The humans were supposed to be defeated. Admiral Reeves saw his opportunity. His voice crackled across the fleet communication channel. "All ships advance. Push through their formation. The Prometheus has given us our chance." The surviving human ships surged forward. They crashed into the confused Coalition line, trading fire at close range where skill mattered more than numbers. The Resolute rammed a Drail Terror ship. Both vessels locked together as Marines fought hand-to-hand in the corridors. Sergeant Reyes led his squad through the Prometheus's boarding tubes. Cutting into a crippled Coalition cruiser, they fought through alien defenders, room by room, deck by deck. When they reached the bridge, Reyes stood over the enemy commander and demanded surrender. The alien looked at the burning wreckage of his fleet through the viewport and dropped his weapon. The battle lasted for hours. When it was over, 31 Coalition ships had been destroyed or captured. The rest fled into hyperspace, running back to their home territories. The human fleet had lost 11 ships, and thousands of sailors had died. But they had won. Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and looked at the destruction around her. Her ship had taken heavy damage. The hull was breached in 12 places. One of her main guns had been destroyed. Half her crew was dead or wounded, but she was still flying. "Argus," she said quietly, "we did it." "Yes, Captain," the AI replied. "Admiral Chen would be proud. The Prometheus has fulfilled her purpose once again." Tanaka allowed herself a small smile. Then she turned to her surviving crew. "Damage reports. Medical teams to all affected sections. Engineering, I need those hull breaches sealed before we can make the jump home." There was no time to celebrate. There was work to do. But for the first time in 3 years, humanity had hope. The news of Meridian Gate spread across human space faster than any ship could travel. Communication stations passed the message from colony to colony, from station to station, from world to world. Humanity had won. The Coalition had been defeated. And at the center of the victory was a legend returned from the grave. The Prometheus. The ancient supercarrier that everyone thought had been destroyed 100 years ago. She had come back to save humanity when all hope seemed lost. People who had never served in the military wept when they heard the story. Children drew pictures of the great ship. Poets wrote songs about Captain Tanaka and her crew of the damned. In one battle, the Prometheus had become more than a warship. She had become a symbol. The effect on the war was immediate and powerful. Recruitment centers across human space were suddenly overwhelmed with volunteers. Young men and women who had been too afraid or too hopeless to enlist now lined up by the thousands. They wanted to serve on ships like the Prometheus. They wanted to be part of something greater than themselves. Even more importantly, the neutral species began to reconsider their positions. The Fenari, a peaceful civilization that had refused to take sides in the conflict, sent a message to Earth expressing their interest in an alliance. The Torlan traders, who had been selling supplies to both sides, announced that they would no longer do business with the coalition. One battle had changed the political landscape of the entire galaxy. Captain Tanaka learned of these developments from her hospital bed aboard the Prometheus. She had been wounded during the battle when an explosion had thrown her across the bridge. 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, and a head injury that still caused headaches. The doctors told her to rest. She ignored them and continued working from her bed. Lieutenant Okonkwo visited her every day. The young tactical officer had changed since the battle. The empty look in her eyes was gone. She stood straighter. She spoke with confidence. The ghosts of the Prometheus had helped her make peace with her past. And the victory at Meridian Gate had proven that she could still be a valuable officer. Captain Okonkwo said during one visit, "I have received a message from Fleet Command. The Coalition has requested preliminary ceasefire talks." Tanaka sat up in her bed, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "They want to negotiate?" "Yes, Captain. For the first time since the war began, Admiral Reeves believes they are frightened. They thought they could crush us at Meridian Gate and end the war in one stroke. Instead, they lost most of their fleet. Their leaders are facing questions from their own people." "This is good news," Tanaka said carefully, "but we should not celebrate too early. The Coalition still has resources. They still have soldiers. They could rebuild their fleet and attack again." Admiral Reeves agrees. He says the talks will take months, maybe years. And during that time, we need to be ready for anything. Tanaka nodded slowly. "The Prometheus needs repairs." "How long?" Chief Engineer Cole says 3 months minimum. The damage was extensive. But he also says that when the repairs are complete, the ship will be stronger than ever. Tanaka looked out the window of her medical bay at the stars beyond. 3 months to rebuild, to train new crew members, to prepare for whatever came next. The war was not over. It had merely entered a new phase. That night, when the ship was quiet and most of the crew was asleep, Tanaka made her way to the bridge. She moved slowly, leaning on a walking stick that the doctors had given her. The corridors were dimmer than usual, the ship conserving power while her reactors were being repaired. But she knew the way by heart now. The bridge was empty when she arrived. She walked to the captain's chair and sat down, just as she had done on the day she first found the ship in the graveyard. "Argus," she said softly, "are you there?" "I'm always here, Captain," the AI replied. "I do not sleep as humans do. I watch over the ship and her crew day and night." Tanaka was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about Admiral Chen. Tell me about the day he hid the Prometheus." Argus was silent for several seconds before responding. "It was the final battle of the First Contact War. We were surrounded, as I told you before. Admiral Chen knew that the war would end that day, one way or another. But he also knew something else. He had seen reports from fleet intelligence. The Coalition was already fighting among themselves. The Vorn and the Keth disagreed about how to divide the territories they expected to capture. The Drael wanted to continue fighting until every human was dead. But the others were tired of war. He knew the war would end soon anyway," Tanaka said. "Yes, he knew that if humanity could survive the next few decades, we would recover. We would grow stronger. But he also knew that someday the Coalition might unite again. They might return to finish what they started. So he made a plan. He hid the Prometheus. More than that," Argus said. "He created a weapon for the future. He recorded the memories and experiences of every crew member into my systems. He loaded the ship with weapons and supplies that would still work after 100 years. He even calculated the most likely places where the next great battle might occur, so that whoever found us would know where to take the ship." Tanaka felt tears forming in her eyes. He planned everything. Even from 100 years ago, he was protecting us. "Admiral Chen loved humanity," Argus said simply. He gave his life not just to save the people of his time, but to save the people who would come after. The people he would never meet. The people like you and your crew. Tanaka wiped her eyes and looked around the empty bridge. She could almost see them now, the ghosts of the original crew, standing at their stations, watching her with approving eyes. They had entrusted their ship to her, and she had not let them down. "What happens now, Argus?" she asked. "What do we do next?" "We continue what Admiral Chen started," the AI replied. "We rebuild the Prometheus. We train her crew. We prepare for whatever threats may come. The war with the Coalition may end tomorrow, or it may last another decade. But whatever happens, the Prometheus will be ready." Tanaka stood up from the captain's chair and looked out at the stars. "Then let's get to work," she said. "The damned have a lot of fighting left to do." The Prometheus drifted through space, battered but unbroken. Inside her hull, workers repaired damage, while ghosts whispered guidance. In her medical bays, wounded soldiers healed. In her training rooms, new recruits learned the ways of war. She was an old ship, crewed by damaged people, guided by the memories of the dead. And she was humanity's greatest hope. The war was not over. But humanity was ready to face whatever came next. Together with the Prometheus, together with Argus, together with the spirits of heroes past, they would protect their home. They would protect Earth, and they would never give up.